أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وأجل فرجه. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here in Noor Center, my first time. And inshallah, the topic we're going to discuss starting today, it's going to be discussed in two sections and two sessions, and the topic is effects of colonialism in East Africa. So today's session one, so I want to start with a hadith from our sixth Imam, Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam. So in this hadith, Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam says, Al-alimu bi zamanihi la tahjumu alayhi al-lawabis. Any person who knows his times, he knows the world in which he is living, okay, Al-alimu bi zamanihi, you know your times, then he is not attacked by confusions. Okay. Which means that if you don't know your times, the world in which you live, and today's world, the modern world, is a very complex world in which we live. It's not very easy to understand what's going on. And therefore you see many people live in this world and they are confused about many things, right? For example, there's so many things happening around the world. There's a war in Ukraine, for example. There is the Palestinian conflict, it's not stopped yet. The oppression on Gaza still continues. And there are so many things that happen around us that we find it very difficult to make sense out of it as to what is going on. So our Imams encouraged that we should have, in addition to other things that we know, we should have socio-political awareness of our times. And that is something that will help us to do our duty. If you have ilm, if you have knowledge, if you know what's going on around the world, then you can know what is the right thing to do. Okay. And one of those topics which is very important is to study colonialism. Okay. And colonialism is something that impacts us even today, even though it's something of the past. And this is going to be my topic. We want to see that the colonial history and East Africa was under colonial powers. So I'll show the map also, and I'll explain which colonial powers were ruling which parts of Africa, and especially East Africa, and how their policies and their ways have affected us even today. Okay. So a lot of the things we see today are remains of the colonial legacy. But inshallah, the aim in these discussions is to understand them in a bit of academic way. Okay? So we want to carefully, slowly go through what actually happened that we stand today. So we're going to start with understanding colonialism first. Okay? So when we say colonialism, what does it mean? So today's a good part of my discussion is going to be spent on understanding colonialism. Okay? So we're going to go a bit back into history. But I'm not going to explain history a lot. You can read it up. There are many books on the colonial history you can read. We want to analyze colonial times more to understand what really happened in the colonial times. So now, colonialism, what is colonialism? If you want to understand colonialism, you have to look at it from this lens. You have to look at it from the lens of the modern world. Because colonialism is the history of the modern world. We all live in the modern world, which has so many things in it, right? So in modern world, you have modern art, you have Western culture, you have secular education, you have English language. Okay, like I'm speaking to you in English language, it's a modern language, right? And it has a colonial history. In fact, this very fact that this language was imposed upon the local population is a sign that colonialism is still active. Modern world has so many things you can see. Capitalism is there, liberal democracy, secular ethics, science and technology, advanced military, media, entertainment, liberalism. All of these are different words that allow us to understand the modern world. And we live in the modern world and we see all of these things. Okay. So now, what is the modern world? If you want to understand, this is not my topic. Inshallah, if I get another opportunity, this is a separate topic that needs to be discussed. But I'm just going to briefly show you that modern world, if you want to understand what it is, and just to make it very simple, modern world is the world in which we live today. The whole world today, majority of the world, is part of modern world, right? No one can escape the effect of modern world on their lives. Only those people maybe who are living in jungles of Amazon or faraway villages in Tanzania, who are cut off from technology, from everything to do with modern world, maybe you can say they are not part of the modern world. But all of us who live here in Dar es Salaam is a big city, it's a cosmopolitan city. A lot of the things that happen around us in Dar es Salaam and also in the country Tanzania is part of the modern world. To understand the modern world, which will be a separate topic, I'm not going to go into that, but modern world is a civilization. Okay. Now what is a civilization? That's a separate topic. It's these things which are coming on the screen. So modern world has a worldview. They believe in certain things, they deny certain things. Then modern world has certain values. Okay. They consider some things important, some things not so important. Modern world has produced a lot of knowledge, right? Science and technology and research, that's part of modern world. Modern world also has a lot of what are called as social systems. Okay? So for example, modern world has an educational system, which is the schools we go to, right? And this is a question we should ask, right? That we send our children to the modern schools. This idea of schooling the way it is right now around the world, it's not only Tanzania, everywhere, it only has a 200, 300-year-old history. Before that, education used to be done differently. Education was done in a very different way. So modern world has a lot of these social systems, educational systems, economic system, political system, they are all from the modern world, and it has a lot of attractions. Modern world is very attractive. For example, this is an attraction of the modern world. This is a product of the modern world and it's very attractive, right? The media we consume, the movies and all those things, these are products of the modern world. And many times when you look at the modern world, you find it very impressive, right? It's amazing technology, you can do so many things with it, so much money is being created, wealth, capitalism. In the school they have like best education and all those things, especially if you go to the West. So the modern world, it started from the West. So the question is, how did Europe, okay, of that time and currently North America. So if you want to ask where is the modern world, mainly it's in three places: North America, United States and Canada, West Europe, okay, so all these European advanced countries, and New Zealand and Australia, okay, towards the east. So these countries together, they form the Western world, the Western powers as they are called. So the question comes is that how did these countries, these few countries, they became so powerful that today they dominate all aspects of human life globally. Okay. No country has true independence because these powers, they put pressure on all the countries through very many things. For example, there's a lot of pressure on countries like Tanzania from IMF, International Monetary Fund, which is basically mainly run by United States because the primary donors of International Monetary Fund are Americans. Okay. So they dictate the policy of IMF, and then IMF dictates its will on other nations and countries, especially in Africa. So the question is, how did they get so much power? The answer is one word, and that is through colonialism. It has a long history, but this is something, again, this is another topic we should study, the history of the modern world. Okay? How did they reach where they have reached today? So making a long story very short, something happened in 15th century in Western Europe, okay, whereby everything started changing, okay, and this is called Renaissance. Maybe some of you must have studied in your history books that in 15th century in Western Europe, so England, France, these countries only, Western Europe, they undergo a big change in their society, and they go away from Christianity to a materialistic worldview. Okay, so they deny God, they become atheist, they say that they become materialistic, and they say that our only aim is to make maximum money and maximum power. Okay, so imagine this mindset is growing in Western Europe, and when you have a society that goes away from religion, any religion goes away from morality, akhlaq and ethics, then naturally they seek only two things, wealth and power, right? Because what will stop you? Okay, what will stop you from exploiting others to increase your wealth? And that is the start of colonialism. Okay, so 15th century Western Europe changes, in 100 years they grow and they develop, and then they start colonizing other countries. Okay, so what happens in colonialism is that firstly, the Western powers that you see today, they are powerful because of the oppression and exploitation that happened in colonial times. Okay, and therefore colonialism is a big part of the history of the modern world. If you ask the modern world, what is your history? It can be summarized in one word, colonialism. But what's interesting is that 99% of colonial history is hidden from us. We don't know much about colonial history, and the West itself tries to hide its own history. And in fact, not only it hides its own history and what they did in colonial times, they even come and they justify what they did in colonial times. So for example, there was an interview where one of these people, he was justifying colonialism. He said that if it wouldn't be for British, Indians would have no railways. Okay. If it wouldn't be for British, India would not, because the British made railways in India, right? So India was a British colony. Okay. Much before Africa became colonized. So India was colonized before Africa could be colonized. So India became a colony for 150 years. It was under British Empire. So they bring justifications to say that colonialism was good for you, but that's like this, that you steal a lot of money from someone, and from that same money you give him back a little bit and you say that, look, I did charity to you. Okay, that's not true charity. You can't steal from a people and then take a small amount, give them back, and then say, okay, I'm doing a favor to you. And that's why colonial history in our textbooks is very filtered. They won't tell you those main parts of colonial history. But whatever you do, the colonial history and colonialism, where these Western powers, they came and they exploited other countries, it was so intense that it keeps coming up again and again. So I'll give a few examples. So this is, you can see on the screen, this is 2022. And this is from Reuters news, so it is authentic. I'm not bringing it. Belgian king reiterates regrets for colonial past in Congo, but no apology. It's very strange that Belgians colonized Congo, and in their 23 years of colonialism, okay, so Congo was colonized by Belgium from 1885 to 1960. Okay, in first 23 years of colonial rule of Belgium, 10 million people were killed by the Belgians. How many? 10 million. Okay. Again, just to get the numbers right, for example, right now there's a genocide going on in Gaza, and we have 70,000 people killed, right? And that's a big number. It's very hard to understand even and process. How could they kill so many people? Belgians killed 10 million people in Congo in 23 years. Okay. So for that, the Belgian king, he regretted but didn't offer even an apology. Look at the arrogance. Like, you go, you oppress a whole nation, kill people there, exploit their resources, but they don't even offer an apology, let alone compensation. Like, if you look from an Islamic perspective, all these colonial powers should compensate the countries they had colonized, but that's very far. Compensation, we are still fighting over an apology that they should come and apologize for colonialism, which also they're not willing to do. That's how much arrogance they have. Okay, so let's move on and look at this, that what is colonialism? Okay. Again, I don't want to go into very academic discussion about colonialism. Inshallah, I'll try and keep it very simple. So colonialism means very simple, that one country, okay, or one government takes control of another country and steals resources from them. So I'm going to read, this is from Wikipedia, definition of colonialism. Colonialism is a practice, okay, it's a practice of control by one people over other people. So one people, so example, British decided to control India. That's colonialism. And what does colonialism mean is that for the benefit of British people, they will exploit Indians. That's the meaning of colonialism. Okay? If the British would come to India and rule India, but for the benefit of Indian people, we won't call this colonialism. Right? If, let's say, British came from outside, they came to India, and they said that we're going to stay here, we're going to rule here, the money, taxes from here, we're going to spend here. That is not called colonialism. Colonialism is when British come to India, they rule over India, and they say India's resources and wealth and taxes, we're going to take it for Britain, for another country. That is called colonialism. And in order to do that, okay, so I'm going to summarize here that colonialism has three aspects to it. Firstly, colonialism is a political project, right? It's political in nature, where the British government came and it took over the governance of India. It destroyed the previous rulers, the Mughals. The Mughals were ruling India, they were Muslim rulers. The British came and they threw them out, and they took control of the governance of India. They became the government of India. So colonialism is always political in nature. Second, the main aim of colonialism is economic exploitation. They are here to steal your wealth. That's the main aim. Okay. Why? Because the modern West is a materialistic world, where they say that wherever and in whatever manner we want, we have to make more money. And colonialism was part of that, so that these big companies, even those times, they could benefit. So just to give an example, India for good 70 years was colonized by one company, East India Company. Okay. So the British government came later, after 1857. Until 1857, India was run by a company. A British company was running the whole of India and exploiting and stealing resources from India for the benefit of Britain. So economic exploitation is the aim. But in order to exploit a country economically, they will also impose their culture and language and ideas on those people. So it's not the case that in colonialism you have people, British, they came to India, they said, we want your money, they'll steal money and go. Okay? No, it's not like that. That was what was called the first phase of colonialism. Okay? So again, I don't want to go into the entire colonial history, but colonialism has two phases. The first phase and stage of colonialism was very simple. And in that first phase, the leaders were Belgians, French and Portuguese. British were not the ones. Okay? So what these people would do is that they were not interested in imposing their culture on people, they're just interested in stealing money. So for example, okay, Belgians colonized South America, okay, so Chile for example, or Bolivia, and they stole so much silver from Bolivia that within 20 years they tripled the silver reserves of the entire Europe. Tripled. So let's say like there was an amount of silver in Europe, they tripled it 3 times, so double the amount they stole, and they're not interested in anything else. That's the first stage of colonialism. The second stage of colonialism is when they became a bit more sophisticated. He said that if we want to exploit them economically, we have to impose our language, our culture, our ideas on them, our values. People should become modern at heart, then we can exploit them. Okay? Again, this is a long history. If I had more time, I would go into it. What I really want to do is that I want to quickly come to East Africa and see what are the effects. So now we want to understand how does colonialism work, what they used to do. Okay. So colonialism was a complete system which had different partners in it. Okay. The first and the most important layer of colonialism was the colonial administration, the colonial rulers. Okay. So what they would do, so for example, I'll give example of Kenya, for example. So Kenya was whose colony? British. Okay. So Kenya for the major part was a British colony. So what did British do when they colonized Kenya? They removed all the government people and administrators from their posts. Okay. And they said that from now on we are going to rule you and we will tell you who has authority and who doesn't have authority. No elections, nothing. So you have the system where you have the Queen, the crown, the British crown, then you have the British royalty, then they would appoint a governor for Kenya, British governor who would come, and then this British governor would hire local administrators, and then at village level, they would have Kenyan tribal leaders part of British system. That's how they worked. So the top government positions were only taken by British people, not allowed. Kenyans were not allowed into those positions. Lower down, village administration and all that, they would allow tribal leaders to be the political administration. So colonialism would come, they would change the political administration of the whole country. The previous rulers are either jailed or killed or they're exiled. You are no one right now, we are the rulers. Why would they do that? Because when they would control politics and political system, now they could control the economy. Now they have control over resources. How? They would come and they would take control of the economy and they would start imposing taxes on people to make money. Okay. So in Kenya, they used to impose, the British used to impose very heavy taxes on Kenyan people. Okay. So everything was taxed, from agriculture to trade to merchant to companies. So they came with a taxation, very oppressive taxation system where they would take a lot of money from the Kenyans. Okay. And all these big banks and wealthy families, they would make a lot of money from this colonial enterprise, right? So British colonial rulers, what it would mean is that some wealthy British families who were into banking, who were into finance, who have a lot of money, they would make more money. They would invest in Kenya, they'd put their money in Kenya. They had very low taxes. The taxes were paid by the people and their wealth will multiply. So their economic goals would be achieved. So that's one part. So again, so colonialism had political system, okay, it had an economic system, but how do you sustain a colony without a military? So they had military power in colonial setup, because when you want to control a whole country and oppress them, the people are going to resist, right? People are going to not, they're going to stand up for their rights. So now how do you control people who want to rebel and stand up for their rights? You need military, okay? So, and British in those days had very sophisticated military, so because the technology was superior, no one could defeat them. To rebel against them and tell them that this is our country, you have to go, they would suppress them. And the suppression would end up being very open and clear and extreme violence. Okay? So if you go and read in history, you can go and search online that there was a rebellion by Kenyans against the British Empire called the Mau Mau Rebellion. Okay? If some of you must have. So there was a rebellion, you can go search online, you'll get all the details, where a group of Kenyans, they gathered, tribal leaders, they gathered together and they said we have to fight the British imperialism and colonialism because they're oppressing, they're exploiting us, they're taking away our resources and money. So they rebelled, and I think it lasted for 5 or 6 months, and in that period this rebellion was crushed by the British, and in this single rebellion the British killed 17,000 people. Just like plain violence. You rebel, you're going to be killed. So to maintain that colonial power, they needed military, a very strong military which is technologically superior, where you cannot match them, you cannot fight them. Okay? So the only option common people had was to surrender to the colonial policies. Okay? And again, you can see here, this is how the colonial administration in Kenya. Kenya is an example because we're speaking about East Africa. So you have the queen, you can see on the screen. Then you had the governor, who had to be British. Then you had provincial governors in Kenya. They're also British. Then you had district commissioners in Kenya. They also had to be British. And then under them you had the tribal chiefs at a lower level of administrations. Those were allowed to be Kenyans. Okay? So tribal chiefs, assistant chiefs, and village elders. So lower down the administration, the 3 last layers, Kenyans were allowed to be there because the British didn't have so much interest at that very local level administration. They're interested in the top level administration. And exactly that was the reason that the British did not want to put too much manpower at every level. They knew that if we have our manpower at these 2-3 top levels, we are in control. No one is going to challenge our superiority. Bottom line, let me summarize this part of discussion, is that, again, I wish I had more time to explain giving examples from other places. Like for example, India is a very important example of colonialism. The result was that because of colonialism, which lasted for around 150-200 years, all the countries that were colonized, they became very weak, economically, culturally, politically, in every area they became very weak, and the colonizers, which were around 7, 8, 10 countries, they became extremely powerful. The gap between the colonizers and the colonized increased by a huge margin. So I want to give one example of India. So India is I'm from India, so I'm giving example of my own country. Okay, so so there was a report. This is from 2018, so this is like a newspaper cutting. In 2018, there is a lady economist in United States, Indian. She wrote a book, okay, calculating how much money British stole from India in 150 years. Okay, so she wanted to calculate, right? And you can do that now because the colonial records, you can read them now, they are public. In those days, colonial records were hidden, but now if a researcher wants to go and read those colonial, so I don't know, from 1, 2, 3 years, for many years she did research and she wrote this book. And the figure that came out was that British, only one colonizer, they stole $45 trillion from India. $45 trillion from India. So the name of the economist is here, Utsa Patnaik. The book is there, you can read it. It's a very well researched book, that this is how much British, again, this is not profit from business. This is not like British were doing business with India and they're making profit. That's separate. This was the money that was literally just stolen away. So the extra tax money. And they had a way to wash out money from India and take it to Britain. So the money that was washed out from Indian pockets and taken to Britain was $45 trillion. Okay. which is 17 times more than UK's annual budget. So currently UK's annual budget is like $3 trillion. 17 times of that they stole when they occupied India and they were colonial. And again, there's details of how they did it and everything, which I'm not going to go into the details. So basically, the summary of our discussion so far is that colonialism was a system of exploitation, okay? And it was mainly economic exploitation. The colonialists were mainly interested in money and resources. Okay? If you had gold, they're very interested. If you have other resources, they're very interested. If they can make money by selling their products to you, they're very interested. Other things, they're not so interested. The main aim was economic gain, and they made immense economic gain. So this $45 trillion was invested in Britain in different sectors, and they went even further ahead, keeping India backwards. Okay? So I'll end this section by mentioning one last thing, that before the British came to India, India was the richest country in the world. Before British came to India, India's GDP, the national income, was 8% of the GDP of the world, a very big figure. So India was the richest country in the world. It was the most technologically advanced country in the world that time. Okay. In 150 years, when the British left, okay, India's GDP share of the world dropped to less than 1%. Okay, from 8%, that's how wealthy India was. In 150 years, the share of India's wealth in the global wealth dropped to less than 1%. And when 1947 India achieved independence, it was one of the poorest countries in the world. And British just left and said that take your independence and you sort out yourself. And that's what the colonial powers did for most of the countries. So this brings us now to Africa. Okay. So I'm going to start my discussion about Africa today and a bit about East Africa, and then inshallah next session I'll only speak about colonial influence in East Africa. Okay. And East Africa I mean like, basically East Africa I mean Tanzania, Kenya and Burundi, and Uganda to some extent. I'm only speaking about these countries. Mainly I'll speak about Kenya and Tanzania because they are very close to each other in their history and what colonialism did to them. So this is 1913. You can see the map. Okay. So in 1913, they say that there was a great scramble for Africa, what they call it. So basically, the colonial powers turned their attention to Africa a bit late. Okay. Yes, they were doing slave trade and all other things for a very long time, but direct colonization only came end of 19th century, so 1880s. And by 1913, the whole of Africa was colonized in a matter of 20 years. It's like these 7-8 countries, you can see the names, right? Belgium, Germany, Spain, France, UK, Italy, Portugal. These 7 countries, they realized that, oh, we haven't colonized Africa. Everybody jumped and there was a scramble. Scramble means that imagine you have a piece of bread, okay, and everybody is hungry and 6-7 people jump and they want to break pieces from the bread. So literally that's what they did to Africa. That these 6-7 countries jumped into Africa and they were fighting each other for share of Africa. And this is how Africa was colonized in so this is 1913. If you see the map, you can see who's West Africa. So let me ask you questions. Who's in West Africa? France. Who's in East and North Africa?
Germany, British.
Germans and British are in Eastern. So from Egypt to Somalia to Ethiopia, that whole belt, right up till Kenya, it was British dominance.
Even in Bukoba, the places before British were Germans.
Yeah. So Germans had a share in Tanzania mainly, and you can see on the west near Angola. Portuguese had a share in Mozambique and Angola. So even today, Mozambique and Angola, their main language is Portuguese, because this language was imposed upon them. Okay, and this is very interesting that one of the places where language was not fully imposed and acquired was Tanzania. Tanzania maintained its original language, Swahili. Okay, so even Kenya, to a good extent, lost, like Swahili was weakened and English took its place. Okay, so this is because Kenya primarily was a British colony. Where is Belgium? Congo. Rwanda, Uganda, Central Africa. So Belgians went into Central Africa, they took over that. Okay, the French, West Africa, and even today there's huge French influence in West Africa. Again, that's a very different story if I get time, that how much the French exploit West Africa even today. But of course, times are changing, but still that influence is there. And you see that United Kingdom was also in the south. So you see that South Africa, Zimbabwe, these are British colonies. Okay, so this is what is called scramble for Africa, that all these colonial powers jumped and they took over, they colonized entire Africa. And again, it's a political project where military plays a big role, and the main aim is economic exploitation. They want to come and take away your resources. Okay, so let me move on. There's one small topic that I have, 2-3 slides, but I think that maybe I can ask you this question. Okay, so this is the topic that we are discussing, effects of colonialism in East Africa. Someone might come and say that, man, it's so boring, right? It's boring, right? History, what happened 100 years ago. So my question to you all is that why should we even study this topic? Is it important? What do you think?
Very important.
Anyone else who would like, who can tell me why should we study this topic? Or if it's not important, then let me stop here. We can all have our chai and we can go home. Anyone wants to say, like, why should we even be discussing these topics? Is there any benefit? Anything you want to share? Like, you heard me for around 30 minutes about a bit about colonialism and what they did. Do you think it's important, it's relevant?
It is important, very, very important.
Why? Give me 3 reasons. So I have 3 reasons. If you tell me the 3 reasons, then we can move ahead.
Technically, at the back of the mind, we are still colonized. Let's
Okay.
say, for an example, you are speaking in English.
Yes. So
English
this,
language has been implemented on us. Rather than talking in Gujarati or Urdu or Parsi,
I can do that.
We are speaking in English.
yes. So English definitely is a colonial influence. Okay. And if I knew Swahili, which inshallah I'm trying to learn, then I should be speaking in Swahili here, because that's the main language. Or if I speak to my Indian community, I should be speaking in their language. Okay, so language is very important.
No.
So yes, I completely agree that language has a big influence on our culture, our values, and all the communities have to preserve and protect their original culture, whatever they are. Okay. So I'm just going to mention 3 points, and please pay attention, because if we discuss this topic without understanding why are we discussing, then it might feel like it's just history. Why are we talking about something that happened 100, 150 years ago? So I want to make it relevant. The first thing that makes this very relevant is that when you live in a place and a country, okay, whoever it is, right, if this is your own country or you migrated from another place, you've been living here for many generations, you have a duty to that place and that country from an Islamic perspective. We cannot live in a place and say that I don't care about this country, I don't care about this place, whatever happens, whoever comes, whoever takes away the resources, whoever steals money, I don't care, as long as I'm okay. Okay. Islam doesn't teach us to be individualistic. Okay. If I am doing okay, that's fine, let everybody, like, whatever happens to them, they are exploited, they are oppressed, doesn't matter. No, Islam teaches us that we have to care for other people as well. So this is first reason that if we want to do something better for this country and improve, then we have to know the history of this country. And we have to know why do we stand, where do we stand. For example, you might see some problems in Tanzania and Kenya. Okay? And you may not understand why do we have these problems. If you read history, you will see, oh, the problem actually started 100 years ago and now you are seeing its result. So history is a mirror into your present. If you want to understand your present, you have to look at history. So if we know history properly, we'll be able to do our duty about present. So that's one reason. Secondly, if you know the history, you will know what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, right? That's what we are told, right? Even as a person, we are told we have to do muhasaba. You have to go back to your past and ask, what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? And then you benefit from your strengths and you pay attention to your weaknesses, that no one should exploit those. And all societies have strengths and weaknesses, and Tanzania is no exception. Tanzania, Kenya, East Africa, Africa in general has a lot of positive things, lot of potential. At the same time, they also have weaknesses and challenges. So if we want to understand that, we have to look at the history, and there are huge opportunities here in Tanzania in terms of what people can do and what can be done. Bottom line, if I want to summarize everything, is this one, that, and I think this was mentioned a few times, that colonialism actually did not end. Okay, we think that colonialism actually ended when these countries, they acquired independence, which is true when these countries, because by 1950-60, all the colonial countries, they acquired independence. When did Tanzania become independent? 1961. Okay. India became independent in 1947. So you see, from 1945 to 1965, most countries, they became independent. So that was a positive step. At least the colonial powers, they had to go back to their countries. So British had to leave India and go. The Germans had to leave East Africa and go. The British had to leave Kenya and go. So they had to leave these countries, and now the administration was managed by. So it's a positive step, but the colonial systems and the colonial ideas, they actually continued. Okay. So about India, they say that when India acquired independence, if you see, nothing changed on ground. There's a very famous statement. They say that in India, when independence came, nothing changed. Only white masters were replaced by brown masters. Okay. So before, you would have British administrators ruling India. So those went away, and now Indian administrators are ruling India. But the system is the same system. They could not change the system. The economic system was same capitalism. The educational system was same English-based secular education. The media system was the same Western media. So countries got independence, but they did not truly become independent when it came to their social systems, values and ideas. And this is what is called neo-colonialism. Again, this is a well-studied topic. There are hundreds of books written on this, which basically means colonialism changed its form. Before, it was colonialism. Now that direct colonialism is not there. Now you have indirect colonialism, where these Western powers are not going to come and exploit you directly, but they are going to come and exploit you through 100 other indirect means. Okay? And this is what is called neo-colonialism. But neo-colonialism, neo means new. So basically, it's a new form of colonialism. Basically, now they have other ways to do the same thing they were doing before. So before, they came, they took over India, and they made immense profit, economic benefit. Now also, they do the same thing, but through other means and other ways. So if you understand colonialism, you will also understand neo-colonialism and what's going on right now. And that's what we want to see, that how colonialism has left its effect until today. So I'm not starting this discussion, my time is up. I'm just going to show one slide, and then inshallah next session, whenever I get time, I'm only going to speak about East Africa only, specifically Kenya and Tanzania, that how colonialism changed everything. And many things you see in our society around us is because the colonial powers decided to do something and we just carried on. No one sat and thought about this, that, oh, this was a change brought by colonialists, maybe we should think about it, maybe some parts of it we need to change. No, everybody said that whatever the colonialists brought, the Western countries brought, must be good. So everybody kind of blindly started following it, and therefore we see a lot of influence today. So I'm just going to read a passage so there's a book by the name of, again, effect of colonialism in Africa is a well-studied topic. There are more than 100 books on it. Again, this research is done by some very good researchers in the Western universities. Some of them are very good. They are impartial researchers. They are not biased. They said they write books. So this is one of those books called Africa's Colonial Legacy. Okay. In that, the writer of the book, in his introduction, he writes this. This is the writer of the book. You can see his photo. The character of contemporary African state, okay, so I'm reading it. The character of contemporary African state has been determined by its colonial origins. Means that whatever you see in Africa today, it's majorly result of what the colonial powers did. The colonial legacy in turn has been altered in crucial and often negative ways since political independence was attained. And this is something even worse. He says that in some ways, after gaining independence, things in Africa have become worse. So the colonialists already made it worse, but when they left, no one thought of going back to pre-colonial times. They just continued the colonial model, and in some African countries, things even became worse than colonial times. Like the countries went even further down into problems and civil war and bloodshed and corruption and so many of these things. So colonialism has had a huge impact on Africa. I'm just going to show you what different types of effect it has had, and then inshallah we'll discuss each of these next time. So there's some of the things that we don't need to go into right now. Okay, so I'm just showing you. Inshallah, this is the outline of our discussion next time. So colonialism has left political impact, so that's one effect. So you'll see political impact of colonialism in East Africa. Okay. You'll see economic impact of colonialism today in East Africa. You'll see system of education heavily being impacted by colonial ideas in East Africa. You'll see culture, lifestyle and language being impacted by colonialism even till today. And the fifth one is religion also has been impacted by colonialism in East Africa. Okay, so it's not like they only cared for the worldly things. No, they even impacted how religion and Islam, for example, its future was shaped. Colonialism had a big role. And the last one, which is very difficult to explain, is that colonialism even affected identity and self-respect and honor of East Africa. It went down to even their identity. And in some places, it pushed some of the countries into identity crisis. It separated them so much from their original culture and values and religion that now they don't know who they are. They are confused. Are we Africans? Are we tribal people? Are we Muslims? So there is identity crisis also because of colonialism, but that's a very deep effect of colonialism, very hard to explain. I don't even know if I'll manage. But inshallah, that's the plan for next session. Inshallah, if I'm alive and all of you have are in good health, then we'll discuss each of these. And again, I'm going to discuss each of these with evidence. So I'm going to bring evidence from books that look, politically, this is how colonialism is still impacting East Africa. Economically, in education, in culture, lifestyle, and language, in religion, and especially impact on Islam and identity and self-perception. So thank you very much.